Family reunions look different when you're the one they all forgot. They think she's someone's assistant. A nobody. Maybe even the help. But they don't know who she really is. Not yet. Behind the small talk and smug smiles, a reckoning is waiting, calm, poised, and far more powerful than they could ever imagine. Don't blink. She's about to remind them exactly who they dismissed. The Carrington estate shimmered under 100 golden lights, its marble floors echoing the clinks of crystal glasses and the smooth hum of string quartets. This was no ordinary gathering. It was the Carringtons' annual reunion, where wealth strutted in heels, egos gleamed brighter than diamonds, and every handshake came with a hidden blade. Ivy Quinn stepped out of her cab in a simple black dress, understated and wrinkle-free. No chauffeur. No designer gown. No entrance worth turning heads. Which was exactly the point. She moved past the valets without announcing her name. No need. No one here ever forgot who she was, they simply pretended to. Inside the grand ballroom, laughter floated like perfume. Aunt Clarice Carrington, the evening's self-declared queen, held court beneath a dripping chandelier, sipping from a goblet as if it were a royal scepter. Her icy gaze found Ivy the moment she stepped through the door. Ivy. Arrived alone, Clarice's voice sliced through the air like a whisper on a blade. And in that same black dress again. Darling, at least borrow a personality next time. Someone chuckled. Likely Mason Carrington, her cousin, recently promoted to senior counsel at Carrington Capital, his father's firm, of course. He raised his glass in mock cheers. Still working as someone's secretary, Ivy? Or have you made it to office manager yet? Ivy smiled faintly. You know me. Always managing. Something. She wandered toward the edge of the room, where the lights didn't burn quite as harsh, and let them carry on their show. They didn't see the steel beneath her silk. They never had. 10 years ago. The conference room in Carrington Capital's headquarters was pristine, cold, and clinical, all glass walls and chrome finishes. Ivy Quinn stood near the whiteboard, 23, freshly armed with an MBA, and just naive enough to believe that good ideas mattered more than old money. Her presentation binder trembled slightly in her hands. But her voice. Clear. Confident. What if we restructure the acquisition pipeline for underperforming assets? She began. Target firms with turnaround potential, deploy agile consulting teams. Laughter erupted before she could finish. Not light laughter. Cruel. Synchronized. Uncle Gregory leaned back in his leather chair, lacing his fingers behind his head. Let me guess. You read that in a Harvard case study. No, Ivy said, still standing. I built this model myself. I ran simulations for 3 different sectors, and the recovery projections average A. Honey, Gregory cut in, if you want to play consultant, start in the archives. Plenty of dusty files waiting for bright young minds like yours. Snickers rippled through the room. Clarice, in her usual pearls and judgmental poise, gave a condescending smile. Sweetheart, we appreciate the enthusiasm. But Carrington Capital doesn't run on student dreams. Mason chimed in from the corner. Maybe Dad can find you something in operations. Filing, admin. You know, real entry-level exposure. Ivy looked at them, each one hiding behind titles inherited like family silver, each one so sure they were untouchable. Her hands stopped shaking. I didn't ask to be hired, she said quietly. I asked to be heard. And we heard you, Gregory said, rising with a chuckle. Loud and clear. The filing room's that way. The meeting ended. No handshake. No follow-up. Only the quiet sting of humiliation and the rustle of expensive suits walking away. She stayed behind after the room emptied, staring at the binder in her hands. Pages full of strategy, numbers, ideas. Ideas they never even bothered to read. That night, alone in her small apartment, Ivy made 2 promises. 1. She would build her own company. Brick by brick. No help. No shortcuts. No Carringtons. 2. She would make them regret every second they spent laughing at her. And she would do it so quietly, so brilliantly. They'd never see it coming. The door creaked when it closed. The kind of door that didn't block noise but trapped cold. Ivy stood alone in the room above the ramen shop, clutching a ring-bound planner and an old MacBook, facing 3 cracked walls and a dusty window overlooking the back alley. It smelled like soy and steam and failure. It was perfect. She ran her fingers across the desk, someone else's, second-hand, then pulled out a blank notepad. Across the top, in sharp ink, she wrote, Vanguard Strategies, Day 1. The first client came out of desperation, not luck. A textile mill in Cincinnati. Family owned, 87 years old. Legacy bleeding into bankruptcy. Ivy had found the news in a 2-line bankruptcy notice buried in the business failures section. She cold called them the next day. My name is Ivy Quinn. I don't represent any buyers. I'm not trying to acquire you. I want to help you stay alive. There was a pause. You're a consultant? The voice on the other end asked, skeptical. Not the usual kind, she replied. The man who answered was David Lemming's, tired voice, dry cough, the sound of someone watching their family name dissolve. We've had 3 firms come in, all promising rescue, he said. Every single one wanted control. I don't want control, Ivy said. I want to prove something. To us? To someone else. He laughed quietly, like a man with nothing left to lose. All right, Ms. Quinn. Let's see what you've got. She didn't sleep for 4 nights. She poured through financials, vendor contracts, debt terms. She flew there on her own dime. Met the staff. Walked the machines. Toured the dying floor. She found what no one else bothered to see, a salvageable core. 6 weeks later, the mill was operational again. Payroll returned. Vendors renegotiated. A local bank backed her revised plan. David met her at the airport before her return flight. You didn't just save our company, he said. You saved my grandfather's name. He handed her an envelope, not payment. A letter. A recommendation. I don't know who you're trying to prove wrong, he said. But you're doing a damn good job. Vanguard grew. Not in size, in reputation. Quiet. Lethal. The antidote to Carrington Capital's predatory appetite. Every time the Carringtons targeted a wounded business, Vanguard got there first. Like an invisible hand catching companies right before they hit the rocks. And when people asked who ran the firm, oh, it's just a tight-knit team. Small, nimble, boutique style. The CEO. I think her name's, oh, she doesn't do press. It started with a headline. Carrington Capital eyes merger with rising tech innovator, Monarch Tech in negotiations. Ivy stared at the screen, jaw tight. She reread the article 3 times. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, frozen. Monarch Tech wasn't just another client. It was her biggest turnaround yet. A bleeding-edge AI company on the brink of collapse 6 months ago. Vanguard had stepped in quietly, revitalized their backend, refinanced their debt, and secured an exclusive distribution pipeline in Asia. She knew the company's CEO. She knew their board. She had shaped their recovery plan with precision. And now Carrington Capital wanted to swallow it whole. Her phone rang. Private number. Ms. Quinn. A smooth voice said. This is Alan Poe from Monarch Tech's legal team. We've just received a merger inquiry from Carrington Capital. They're aggressive. Ivy's voice stayed even. What do they want? Full acquisition. Immediate seat restructuring. They're offering above market value. It's tempting to the board. Have they mentioned Vanguard? A pause. Not yet. Ivy hung up without another word. Her heart was thudding now, not with fear, but with something darker. They're getting reckless. She marched down the hall of Vanguard's new downtown office, minimalist, glass, steel, elegant, but still anonymous. Her team glanced up from behind monitors. Emergency briefing. Boardroom. 10 minutes, she said. Inside the glass-walled room, her top analysts gathered, confusion in their eyes. Monarch Tech's board is entertaining a merger with Carrington Capital, Ivy announced, dropping the article printout onto the table. Jude, her strategy lead, frowned. They're trying to cut us out. Not yet. But they're trying to force our hand, she said. Her voice was razor-sharp now. They don't know we're behind Monarch's recovery. What do we do? Asked Ava, her financial ops lead. Ivy leaned forward. We let them come to us. 2 days later, it happened. An email arrived. From Carrington Capital MA Division. To Vanguard Strategies, Executive Office. Subject, request for high-level negotiation. Vanguard's position in Monarch Tech has become of material interest. Carrington Capital formally requests a meeting with your executive leadership to explore alignment and integration. CEO attendance required. Ivy read it once. Then again. They had no idea what they were asking for. She smiled to herself, not sweetly. It was the smile of someone who'd been waiting 10 years for a door to open. The mansion's east wing, usually closed off during parties, had been reopened, its heavy oak doors propped ajar, revealing a formal meeting room rarely used since Grandfather Carrington's day. Long before the Carrington Capital empire became a headline machine, this was where real deals were sealed, with scotch, hard eyes, and old money confidence. Tonight, that same room hummed with tension. Aunt Clarice paced by the grand bay windows, clearly irritated. This is completely ridiculous, she muttered, adjusting the diamond clasp on her velvet shawl. Interrupting a formal reunion for a last-minute meeting with some no-name CEO. Gregory stood by the fireplace, glass of Dalmore in hand. If Vanguard's top brass is finally showing their face, we take it. Monarch Tech is too valuable. Mason lounged in a tufted leather chair, legs crossed, scrolling absently on his phone. Bet you $5,000 it's some old consultant in cheap loafers, he said with a laugh. Or one of those Silicon Valley types, who thinks hoodies are a brand strategy. Clarice scoffed. Whatever it is, I hope they are quick. I have donors arriving in half an hour and this entire wing smells like desperation. Gregory turned to the assistant by the door. As soon as their CEO arrives, bring them straight in. No introductions. We'll get this over with. The assistant gave a nod and stepped out. Seconds later, the doors opened again. There was a pause. Then, heels. Slow, sure, deliberate. Ivy Quinn walked in. Not the shadow in black silk they'd seen earlier that evening. Not the secretary they liked to mock. This was a woman transformed. She wore a navy blue suit, tailored within an inch of perfection, and walked like someone used to commanding a room, not asking for permission to enter it. Her presence was quiet, but seismic. Gregory turned first, frowning. Mason looked up, blinked, then actually laughed. "Okay, wait," Mason said, rising. "Is this a joke? Did someone send the admin team by mistake?" Ivy didn't flinch. She walked past him, past Clarice, and directly to the center chair at the long table, the seat of power. She pulled it out. Saturday. Folded her hands. Looked each of them in the eye. "I believe you asked to speak with the CEO of Vanguard Strategies," she said. "So here I am." For a second, just one, no one spoke. Then Clarice blinked, hard. "You're... what?" "The CEO," Ivy repeated. "Founder, lead strategist, and controlling shareholder of Vanguard Strategies." Gregory's fingers tightened around his glass. "You've been running this firm this entire time?" "Since the day I walked out of your boardroom 10 years ago," she said. "After you told me I belonged in the filing room." Mason scoffed, trying to save face. "Hold on. You're telling us you've been behind all the failed acquisitions? All those turnarounds?" "Yes." "You?" Clarice echoed in disbelief. Ivy turned her gaze to her aunt, calm, unshaken. "You assumed I was invisible. That doesn't mean I wasn't watching." Gregory took a step forward. "This is unethical. You've misrepresented yourself to this family." "No," Ivy cut in. Her voice was smooth, low, and sharp as glass. "I protected my clients. I never once used my family name. You simply never asked who I was, because you didn't think I mattered." She pulled a folder from her briefcase. Slid it across the table. "Let's talk Monarch Tech. Here's their updated valuation. You're 43% under market, your proposal is offensive, and your model is based on outdated figures, because you never realized we were the ones rebuilding them from the inside out." Gregory didn't open the folder. "You think this gives you power over us?" Ivy leaned forward. "No. I know it does." She pulled up a second folder. "This one outlines every company Vanguard blocked you from acquiring in the last 5 years. Every bid undercut. Every deal dissolved. Every client who came to us after your firm tried to gut them." Mason swallowed, hard. Clarice was pale now, barely keeping her expression neutral. Gregory's voice was rough. "You really think you can hold this family hostage with one merger?" Ivy stood. "I don't need to hold you hostage, Uncle." She paused. "I've already taken the keys to your war room." And with that, she picked up her phone, her tablet, and walked to the door. Just before stepping out, she turned back. "By the way," her voice was casual, almost amused, "next time you want to schedule a meeting with the CEO, maybe don't call her a secretary at her own family's dinner table." She exited into the hall, heels clicking louder than the silence behind her. Ivy didn't return to the party. She went straight to her car, the city lights reflected in the polished metal of her composed exterior. Inside, she tapped out a message. To Jude Vanguard, Strategy. Message. Initiate Protocol Atlas. Send revised terms to Carrington. Deadline, 48 hours. Attach acquisition outline. Full asset list. Make them blink. She hit send, leaned back, and closed her eyes. It had begun. The next morning. Carrington Capital HQ, Executive Boardroom. The room was full. Clarice sat at one end of the long mahogany table, her arms crossed, a forced poise in place. Gregory leaned over a thick folder, jaw clenched, flipping through each page with increasing alarm. Mason stood by the wall, silent, as the Vanguard proposal played on the large screen. No one spoke for a long moment. Then Gregory slammed the folder shut. This is blackmail. It's business, Ivy replied calmly. For the first time, with fair terms. She stood at the other end of the table, not seated this time. She didn't need to sit. The power was already hers. The screen behind her displayed the title. Proposal for Strategic Absorption, Monarch Tech Extended Holdings. Submitted by Vanguard Strategies. Ivy stepped forward. You wanted Monarch Tech. I'm offering it. She clicked the remote. The slide changed. But under these terms, Vanguard will retain 51% control. Carrington Capital may acquire a 25% minority stake, non-voting. The rest remains with Monarch's board and early-stage investors. Gregory leaned forward, his voice low. And if we say no? Ivy met his gaze without blinking. Then Vanguard will proceed with its secondary initiative, acquisition of Carrington Capital stock via third-party equity partners. We've already secured 17% through quiet purchases. We're prepared to buy up to 40% more. Clarice's voice cracked. You're threatening to buy us out. I'm offering you a seat at a table you no longer control, Ivy said. It's not a threat. It's your last chance to stay relevant. Mason finally spoke, voice tight. You're bluffing. Ivy pulled out her phone. Clicked once. A document appeared on the main screen, a binding agreement from Redbridge Equity, one of the most aggressive hedge funds in New York. Gregory stared at it. His face turned a shade paler. You brought in Redbridge. They are very eager, Ivy replied. And very well funded. Clarice stood abruptly. This is insane. You would let strangers buy out your own blood. Ivy's voice didn't rise. But it cut deeper than any shout. You stopped being my blood the moment you told me I belonged in a file room. Silence. You treated me like I was disposable. Now I'm simply showing you what that looks like. From the other side of the table. Gregory exhaled slowly. Looked at Clarice. Then Mason. Then back to the glowing contract on the screen. He knew. They all did. They were outplayed. And this wasn't check. This was checkmate. We'll sign, Gregory said finally, bitter as rust. But don't think this means you've won. Ivy gave a small, cool smile. I'm not here to win, Uncle. She reached across the table, laid down the final agreement. I'm here to rewrite the game. One by one, the Carringtons picked up their pens. And signed. The room had never been so quiet. The final pen scratched across the paper, and just like that, a signature became a surrender. Clarice's diamond bracelet jingled as she pulled her hand back, jaw clenched like steel. Gregory stared blankly at the document, as if refusing to accept what his own hand had just agreed to. Mason didn't look at anyone, just shoved the pen forward and sank into his chair like the air had left the room. Ivy stood at the head of the table, calm, collected, and devastating. No one dared speak first. She picked up the signed contracts, slid them neatly into her briefcase, and looked across at the very people who had once laughed at her over dinner. The merger terms will be finalized by end of week. You'll receive transition instructions from our legal team. She paused. And for what it's worth, this didn't have to happen like this. Clarice let out a brittle laugh. Spare us the moral lesson, Ivy. You've made your point. Ivy tilted her head slightly. No, Aunt Clarice. You made the point. I just underlined it. She left the room without another word. Behind her, the Carringtons sat among the ruins of their certainty. And the fallout began. It began with a whisper, as always in their world. Then a leak. Then a fire. By the next morning, a video from last year's charity gala had resurfaced. Clarice Carrington, mid-toast, glass in hand, voice loud and smug. Some women just aren't built for leadership. They want equality, but can't handle pressure. The boardroom isn't therapy, darling. The clip tore through the internet in hours. Viral. Vicious. Unforgiving. This is a targeted attack, she hissed at her PR manager. I want it down. It's everywhere, the manager replied helplessly. Even TikTok. They are remixing it with Beyoncé tracks. Clarice's face was stone. That evening, she received a short email with no subject line, no signature. Just a single line. You called me fragile. So I let the world hear you roar. She slammed her laptop shut, hands trembling. Mason. He tried to spin it. At first, he claimed ignorance. Blamed legal oversights. Claimed internal sabotage. None of it worked. Carrington Capital suspended impending investigation, citing his failure to detect a direct family conflict of interest in the Monarch deal. The firm's managing partner had only one question during the hearing. Did you or did you not refer to the CEO of Vanguard Strategies as a glorified secretary in writing, while actively attempting to acquire her client's company? Mason couldn't answer. And that was answer enough. His keycard was disabled within the hour. Later that night, his inbox pinged with a calendar invite. Coffee with Ivy. Monday 9 a.m. Location, Vanguard HQ. He stared at it. Didn't delete it. Didn't accept it either. Just sat there, in his now silent apartment, where even the blinds seemed ashamed of him. Gregory. It took him the longest to crack. He still barked orders, still called in favors, but the industry had moved on overnight. No one returned his calls. No one wanted to be associated with a man who lost to the girl in the filing room. Then came the board vote. 72% in favor of forced retirement. The press release called it a transition to honor legacy. Everyone knew it was exile. In his final act of dignity, Gregory wrote a letter. Posted publicly. Signed in full. I underestimated someone who once asked for a seat at my table. Instead of giving her a chair, I gave her a reason to build her own. That was my mistake. She built a better table. He ended it with 6 words. I taught her everything by ignoring her. Anne Ivy. She said nothing. Did no interviews. Held no press conferences. The only statement from Vanguard was a simple press release. Leadership, redefined. Ownership, reclaimed. And when the Carringtons hosted their next reunion, the venue was changed, no longer the gilded halls of Clarice's mansion. This time, it was held in the top-floor boardroom of Vanguard Strategies. And this time, everyone knew who Ivy Quinn was. The ballroom at the Metropolitan Business Forum glowed with soft gold light, the kind Ivy used to associate with other people's success. Tonight, it lit up for her. A screen behind the stage read, Breakthrough Entrepreneur of the Year, Ivy Quinn, CEO, Vanguard Strategies. Applause thundered. But Ivy didn't rush to the podium. She stood up slowly. Smoothed the front of her midnight blue dress, sleek, elegant, quiet, and made her way to the stage with the same poise she used to walk into rooms where no one thought she belonged. As she took the microphone, the room fell into a hush. She didn't smile at first. Just looked out into the sea of powerful faces, CEOs, founders, venture capitalists, journalists, most of whom had no idea they'd once laughed at people like her. I was once told, she began, that if I wanted to succeed, I should start by filing papers. A ripple of murmurs. They weren't wrong. Filing taught me how to study patterns, how to recognize weakness, how to build from the ground up. She looked directly into the camera now, live streamed to over 800,000 viewers. But what they didn't teach me was this: real power doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it watches, waits, builds in silence. Another pause. Then a small, almost private smile. And then one day, it owns the building. Applause rose again, but louder this time, more personal. Ivy continued, her voice steady. I didn't start Vanguard Strategies to prove anything. I started it because I couldn't find a place where people like me, overlooked, underestimated, could lead without apology. She gestured toward her trophy, minimal, elegant, her name engraved beneath the word breakthrough. This doesn't belong to the loudest person in the room. It belongs to the one who built something worth walking into. When she stepped off the stage, a line of women waited to speak with her. Young founders, solo moms, immigrant CEOs, first-generation students. All of them with stories. All of them seeing themselves in her. A young woman, barely 22, approached her nervously. Ms. Quinn, how did you do it? How did you stay so quiet for so long? Ivy looked at her with warmth. Because I wasn't quiet, she said. I was building. The night after the awards ceremony, Ivy sat alone in her penthouse office at Vanguard HQ. City lights stretched endlessly below. The trophy sat on the windowsill, catching the glint of passing traffic, not as a monument, but as a quiet reminder, you did it. And you didn't need their permission to begin. She unlocked her phone, scrolling past the flood of messages. CEOs, partners, journalists, all of them eager now. But her eyes paused on one notification, simple, unexpected. Text from Mom. Time, 10:43 p.m. She tapped it open. I always believed you would prove yourself. I am so proud. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. Ivy stared at the screen, still for a long moment. Then, for the first time that week, her breath caught. Not at the victory. Not at the applause. But at those words, finally spoken. She replied simply. Thanks, Mom. Next time, I want to make you coffee myself. At a place I own. A month later. Vanguard HQ, Executive Boardroom. The room was transformed. Gone were the cold lights and clinical silence. Instead, fresh flowers lined the windowsills. Warm lighting bathed the long glass table. A catered brunch buffet replaced investor decks. No screens. No pitch decks. No legal binders. Just family. Her family. Even Clarice was there, stiff but seated, drinking Earl Grey instead of champagne. Mason had brought dessert. Quietly. Almost sheepishly. Gregory didn't speak much. But when Ivy passed him a plate, he nodded once. A small gesture. But honest. Then her mother entered, dressed modestly, eyes wide as she took in the skyline view. This is where Con Lam Vics are. Ivy nodded. And where I decided to host our next reunion. Her mother looked around. It's beautiful. And strong. Then she smiled gently. Jing Con. They stood for a moment together, in the center of it all. Not just a company Ivy built. But a room full of people finally learning how to look at her, really look and see. Not the girl in the corner. Not the secretary. But the woman who rewrote her place in the story, on her own terms. One morning, months later, an intern at Vanguard was walking through the executive floor when she caught sight of something that made her pause. There, in the corner of the glass-walled boardroom, stood Ivy Quinn. No blazer. No briefcase. No power heels. Just Ivy, in a soft sweater, pouring coffee into a visitor's mug. The intern leaned over to her mentor and whispered, "Is that the assistant?" The woman beside her smiled knowingly. "No, sweetheart." She pointed toward the view behind Ivy, the entire skyline stretching wide and unshakable. "That's the woman who built this tower. From the ground up." And in that moment, it became clear. Success isn't found in the spotlight others shine on you. It's built in the quiet foundations you lay when no one believes you can. And sometimes, power looks like a woman pouring coffee. But she's the CEO of an empire.